This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. We have another exciting interview for you today. This gentleman and I have not had the pleasure of working together, but he is well known to me and has been for several decades. Let me tell you about him. He is not only a very successful stand-up comic, he helped create the Great American Comedy Festival in Nebraska. He spent over 17 years as the warm-up comic for The Late Show with David Letterman. Boy, that's fun. He was nominated for an Emmy Award, whoopee, and the three-time winner of the Best Male Comic in New York City. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, it's the one and only Eddie Brill. Eddie, the crowd goes nuts. We're so honored to have you on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure, Scott. I'm glad that it took 40 or so years, but here we are. We finally made it.
Well, we were working, we were swimming in the same waters. We just didn't get a chance to work together. But why don't you share with the audience, how did you end up in stand-up comedy, and in what age were you?
My family was very funny. My mom was the funniest of the whole family, and we always had comedy albums, and we always liked, comedy shows like Cara Burnett and, stuff like that. So we were a real funny family, sarcasm and joy. And my parents were young, so we were all, we had a tight scenario of fun and laughter. We certainly didn't have money, but we made up for it in laughter, and we had a lot of fun together. So, I never thought, and I loved comedy. I watched comedy on television. I never thought, it would be a career or something I'd want to get into. Yeah, I went to college in Boston. My stepfather, who was fantastic, he ended up having a very short life because of cancer. And I decided that if life was so short, before, when I was like a junior in high school, that if life was so short, I better have the do what I love the most and have the most fun doing it. So I went to school to do broadcast journalism, most likely sports announcing. I love sports, and I had done a lot of announcing while I was in high school and writing. So I wanted to get into, combine the two, broadcast journalism. Well, I went to this very small college in Boston called Emerson, and my uncle was teaching at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and he recommended Emerson, said, look, if you want to get involved, the great thing about Emerson, it's only like 1,700 students, and you'll be able to get on the air or, do news or whatever I was going to do as a freshman. Whereas like if I went to Syracuse or some of these bigger universities, you'd have to wait till you're a junior.
Right. So, it's better to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. You get more opportunities. Yeah.
And so on my very first, or second week in college, there was a couple of guys talking about this comedy thing that they were starting up. Said, what kind of thing is this? And they said, it's an improv group. And I said, well, when's the meeting? And they told me, and I went to that meeting, and the rest is history. And there was a lot of people who became very famous, who were all kids in this comedy group together, and it was wildly successful. And the history of comedy at Emerson was very rich, and it, got richer later on. And Norman Lear was one of the people who had gone to Emerson. And I met him and told him what we were doing. And he was very thrilled about this scenario. And he put money up, school matched it, and we had the first comedy writing department in the country. So all of a sudden, I'm not doing comedy. And then, I'm doing improv and sketch and then radio and comedy shows. And I just kept loving it more and more and more and more. And then I started trying stand-up. And, I was okay. It wasn't very good, but I tried it, did it for a while, graduated college, quit doing stand-up because I thought, that was fun, but, whatever. And then I missed it. And then so in 1984, I had the opportunity to run a comedy club, very much like what you did. And I, was hosting every week. So, bringing in these incredible comedians, again, I could name drop the hell out of it and just tell you, just Adam Sandler's first club he worked at was the club that I was running called the Paper Moon. and it was wildly successful. And then it became the Boston Comedy Club, which became, was a very famous club for a long time. But I mean, it's just one thing after another. I just loved it so much. I'll never forget, and every comedian will agree, the first skit I was in the comedy group, I got a laugh, and it was so powerful. And when you get that laugh, it's like a drug, and you chase it the rest of your life.
Yeah, there's so many things that you put in that opening statement, Eddie, that ring so true with many of us in the industry. First off, we want to make it clear you were in your early 20s, I'm assuming, when this started. And I think the advice from your uncle, or what you picked up, it wasn't really advice, but what you learned, sadly, my condolences for the death of your uncle, is so poignant and true that when somebody close to you passes at a young age, for me, it was my mom, you realize that there's only so much time. You don't want to waste it doing stuff that doesn't mean anything to you. My theory in life is have fun and the money hopefully take care of itself, but I was planning to enjoy life, whatever I did. And in your case, your opportunities in university got you on the radio, which was something you did endeavor to do, but that, just through circumstance led you to the improv group and then doing some stand-up comedy. When you tried stand-up comedy, do you remember any of your first jokes? Was there a style or somebody you emulated?
Well, my hero was George Carlin. I saw him on, many shows on television, and I just, fell head over heels for him because that's the way I thought. I'm very much into wordplay and, the sort of smart and silly comedy that he did. So I always had that. And, and at most comics, I was as guilty as anyone else of acting like a comedian at the beginning and being very George Carlin-esque in my delivery until I realized that, the key is really to be your most authentic self. And, there's a great saying that I live by, that it's not so much of a saying, but someone told Michelangelo when he was making the statue of David, in awe of this perfect statue, and said, "How did you make this incredibly perfect statue out of this block of marble?" And Michelangelo said, "I just chipped away at the pieces that weren't him." And
yeah.
I was like, "Oh." So that's what I've kind of tried to do more and more, is to, be as vulnerable as I can be and be myself, and not, and to be compelling as a performer, to be compassionate as a human being, and to add all of those things to this really, that would seem very natural. So the original question was, what kind of bits did I do at the beginning? I did cartoon impressions, and I had a few wordplay jokes that I wrote as like a kid, and then I just put together, I guess it was like 10 minutes, and the crowd was mostly my friends from school at the tavern little place we had there, and they laughed at all of us, and who knows if we were good or not. We were just,
Well, it's important to have support, right?
We had support, and what's interesting, in Boston, there was quite a scene, and there was like this hierarchy of these brilliant comedians, and one of the leaders was Barry Crimmins, who sort of ran a lot of the Boston comedy community, and he had a club that he ran called the Ding Ho, which was in Inman Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he, really, he was a professional, and he was a hard worker, and he got us all work. And I remember he was, I got paid. My first paid gig was like $7. We split the door up on all the comedians from the show, and we all, a lot of us have Barry to thank for, creating this place with integrity and forcing us to, be artistic. And, so we learned a lot right away because we were surrounded by this incredibly talented group of humans.
Well, I think that it sounds like, and it's important that you have stressed that it's the community around us that helps us develop into what we want to become. It's kind of like Michelangelo's block of granite. The statue, as he said, was always in there. He had to just get to it. And I think that much like comedy, you have to chip away at the whole concept until you find who you are on stage. We passed over a couple things. First off, I wanted to comment on how everyone starts acting like a comic. In other words, we see other comics, or we've seen on TV or heard on an album what a comic sounds like, and then initially we'll go up on stage, and that's what we do. We kind of copy out of admiration. But you're right. The true comedy in stand-up is ourselves and being ourselves on stage. But I thought it was really poignant for you to say, in the beginning, we were acting like comics. And I had a chance to interview Dennis Blair, who opened for George Carlin for many, many years. Yeah. And he was saying how, and emphasizing that Carlin had a style that everybody wanted to be like initially, because he was so genius and so smart, and his honest impression and interpretation of life on stage. But we passed over something a while back I'd like to go back to, Eddie, if it's okay. At one point, you were acting as the MC and helping book the Paper Moon Comedy Club. What was it like going from being on stage as a performer to all of a sudden kind of being the talent coordinator for that room? Did you find it taught you a lot, or was it challenging?
A combination. I had stopped doing stand-up, and I was in advertising for a while, doing writing funny commercials and scripts, and it was kind of fun, but I was taking advantage of it. I was a young kid, and, didn't make a lot of money doing it, but it was really exciting to hear, some of the stuff I wrote, whether it be jingles or copy, to be on the air. But it wasn't the same as doing stand-up or performing, which was really alluring to me. So at the beginning, I wasn't, the guy I went to college with named Joe Mauricio, was working at the restaurant upstairs at this venue, and he contacted me and said, look, they're looking to do a comedy show. And I was, one of the people in charge of the comedy group in college. So he called me because, asked me if I was interested. And at first I wasn't. And then I said, yeah, let me try it. And then, because I was a comedian first, more than a booker, I was running the club so that, the comedians were treated like gold. We're treated like, the way they're supposed to be treated. And so it was a very comfortable place for comedians to come and work out, try new material. And, you couldn't go wrong. I mean, the people in our, we went to school with Stephen Wright and Dennis Leary and Mario Cantone and Laura Keitlinger. And I mean, I go on and on and on. Before us, it was Bill Dana and Norman Lear and Henry Winkler and Andrea Martin. And then after us, it was Bill Burr and Anthony Clark and, Jen Kirkman. And I mean, again, just name all the names. So we were surrounded always by good people. When I moved back to New York and was going to run this comedy club, I didn't think of myself as running the comedy club like a business. I was just, found a way to do stand-up again and to call all my friends up, like, Mario and, and Susie Essman and all the people I knew in New York through comedy. And, so I was running a comedy club, and I was working a day job and paying the comedians out of my pocket from my day job until we eventually...
Really?
Yeah. Because, I wanted comedians to get paid for what they did. Comedians deserve to get paid. A lot of scenarios these days, comedians have to pay to get on stage. And that really goes against everything. A comedian's supposed to get paid, not pay.
Right. And,
yeah. So I made sure comedians got some money, feeling good for what they did. And then all of a sudden the club started doing really well. And I started paying the comedians really well. And I was paying them better than all the other clubs in New York City. And then all the other clubs hated me because, I was...
Yeah, competition. Well, what an amazing opportunity, though. That's awesome, Eddie.
Yeah, but, I liked running it in a sense, but not, that wasn't my main focus. My main focus was getting on stage and having fun each weekend with a bunch of really talented people. I started, finding all these comedians from other cities who were contacting me, always wanted to work in New York, but they weren't part of the clique that was at Catch a Rising Star or the comic strip. So, I'd bring in these comics from Boston, San Francisco, LA. And so I was getting different comics to come to New York. people I had met, people I had worked with a little bit, and they were always treated really well. We had an incredible sound and light system in the club. We had a very artistic lighting director guy who would change the lighting subtly when he knew the comedians really well. When they would transfer, they would go from one bit to the next, and we had a really good thing going. There was a lot of layers to it. We're very proud of it. And then it got a little too much where I didn't have an office. So people call me at home at 2 a.m. Well, would you book me? And it's only 52 weeks in the year, and you can only have 52 headliners. And, there's thousands of comedians. And here I am, a comedian traveling around doing stand-up. And every person I met, and I don't blame them, they were like, hey, how can I get to your club? And I used a lot of them. Most of the people I got through recommendations of other comedians. And, that's pretty much how my career has gone in the first place. Here we are. I'm in New York. I get a call from this guy I know who worked at the restaurant. Now I'm booking a club,
Yeah,
on and on and on of all the different opportunities I've gotten. It's pretty much who you know. So you treat everyone with respect. People remember that.
Well, Eddie, that's great advice for everybody, but talk about opportunities, starting off with leading the group and helping start the group at university led to these connections where you end up working and booking this room. I would imagine that the combination of seeing all that talent, but also being an MC, you're getting a lot of additional stage time, must have really helped you hone who you were on stage.
Yeah, and I learned, Colin Quinn and I sort of ran the club. Colin helped me because he had a group of really talented friends that I didn't know, and he introduced me to them, and we sort of put our heads together, and we switch off each week emceeing, just so one person's running the door, and then that other person is one of the hosts for that week, and we did that. And Colin really, comes from integrity and hilarity and very caring and very good person, very compassionate to other comics. So surrounded by an amazing community of incredibly talented people, and there's a few bad eggs, but in reality, if you really think about it, there's mostly incredible comedians. I've been so lucky to have some of the greatest names in show business help me. My first set on Letterman, I had help from Joan Rivers and David Brenner on my first set. I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Each one of the stories is amazing, but I got some of the best advice in my life from Joan Rivers, who, was there for me at the beginning. And, and when there was a time when I moved to LA in 1986, 87, lived both in New York and LA. And I was living at the Comedy Store. There was a house behind the Comedy Store that I lived in. And it was the Comedy Store was my living room every day, and I'd go there at night, every night, and hang out and do sets and people like Sam Kinison and, Taylor Negron and Robert Schimmel and John Mendoza. These people reached out to me and got me involved and took me under their wings. And, Kinison was very good to a bunch of us. We were, like Jimmy Schubert, myself, Stephen Pearl, Larry Scarano. There was a bunch of comics who work in the Comedy Store, and we were sort of the junior, the JV club, the junior varsities of the Comedy Store.
Right.
And Kenneth kind of running the place, and he made sure that we all got stage time.
Well, again, opportunity shined on you, Eddie. I mean, I've interviewed over 80 different comics, and no one's had a lot of people have had luck fall their way and opportunities open for them, but you have had an amazing series of things that one thing led to another. I mean, doing what you were doing in New York and then coming out to the West Coast, to be honest, and I'm sure you know the story, Eddie, hundreds of comics would get good in Boston, San Francisco, or New York and go to LA, and they have to start over. And you got that opportunity by staying at the Star and working under Kinison and Mitzi Shore and some of the people that were around at the time. Just took your level of comedy, had to have helped take it to that next level. I mean, it's like you kept going to class after class to school, much like university. Being that close and that involved in the Comedy Store is like going to University of Comedy.
It was. And then, you'd see Roseanne Barr and Richard Pryor and, all these people would be coming in every night, and you just watch and marvel at what they do, and you watch them develop their material as well. And you understand, how it works. And, everyone was Louis Anderson. I mean, just the names that I can tell you about the people who helped me when I was starting out. And, so I vowed that I would help comedians along the way, because the amazing amount of help that I got along the way. And then, it's just crazy because it always sounds like I'm name dropping, but I am. Don Rickles became my friend, and then Carlin became my friend. And then, it's just like surreal. Dick Cavett and I are really, really close, which is so weird because, and it's funny because I met Dick Cavett when I was doing the festival in Nebraska. We were looking for someone to get the first Johnny Carson award, because that's what the festival was about. And we had to pick Cavett because it just made sense. Cavett's from Nebraska. He wrote for Johnny Carson. They knew each other. So, and I love Dick Cavett, and I love this show. And so I was really nervous to meet him. And I really haven't been nervous to meet a lot of people, but I was kind of nervous to meet Cavett. And within 3 seconds, we were best friends. And we're still to this day, he's like my uncle. It's just like
it's
so
interesting
amazing.
when the people we admire and look up to become our peers and friends. It's an interesting transition. Some people don't understand outside of Hollywood that celebrities are just people, and that they have the same interest in need to interact with people that think similarly to them or in a similar industry. Being backstage with Robin Williams, hanging out, it's just Robin. Right. It's not the guy you see on stage. It's just Robin is a person. And Dick Cavett is just a classic when it comes to entertainment and getting that opportunity. Again, I keep using that word, but Eddie, you've had such a gifted life. I think that's amazing. Now, all this exposure to comedy and stage time, you went from, doing some classes and doing an improv class to helping on a club and emceeing, and then building your stand-up career. At what point did you really feel successful? What led to your a three-time winner of the best male comic in New York?
Well,
that's a big deal. Well,
there's a big cabaret community in New York City with incredible singers and comedians and actors, and it's the Manhattan Association of Cabarets and Clubs. And every year they'd have best male, best female comic. There's no way that you can say someone's the best comic, because I certainly, if I'm in a community with Dave Attell and I'm in a community with Susie Essman, I can't say I'm the best comic. But I was voted by my peers, which means the world to me. As I remember one year Susie Essman and I were the winners of the male and female. When you get that scenario, you feel like, okay, even more important than having some crowd like you, to have your peers think of you, because these were the people who voted were musicians and singers and piano players, and I did a lot of cabaret clubs during that time as well. So I wouldn't say I was voted best comic in New York, but I was voted the 3 years in a row by the MAC Association, and it gave me a nice confidence that my peers liked what I did, and that's always a really nice feeling, because I look at some of the years, and then I always think of me as always being a kid and always looking up to these older people and all this stuff, and it turns out I'm older, and I'm. But all along the way, I've found young comedians and I've let them know, just like the other comics did to me, just to come up to me, especially at the beginning, and say, look, you got what it takes. Keep going. And that's where I really found the great opportunity. And then, we were in LA and we were broke. We were, had no money. But a friend of mine who lived in New York lent me her car. I was completely flat broke. I was, we didn't have a lot of money growing up at all. So it never bummed me out. I was able to still have fun and have, make the best of it. But we had no money. So when I went to LA, I was living at the Comedy Store, so I didn't pay any rent. I was only making, the money at the Comedy Store wasn't a lot of money at all. And then a college friend of mine gave me a phone call and said, look, I know you're out here in LA. Have you ever done warm-up? And I said, oh, yeah, I've done warm-up, but I didn't really do warm-up. I just was looking for some kind of work. And he was working at Saved by the Bell, which was literally across the hall from the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. I mean, not like far. It was like 6 feet away, maybe 5 feet away. And I got a job doing warm-up at this TV show, and it paid me, very well. And now I didn't have to worry so much because, I'd pull into my friend's car, that my friend Holly, who lent me her car. She had a Chrysler Baron convertible, gold Chrysler, convertible.
Classic.
So when I would pull into the Comedy Store, these people thought, oh my, perception is a lot of it, is 9/10 of the law or whatever. People would think, wow, this guy must be successful. Look at his fancy car. Meanwhile, I put gas in the car. I was very, very, but, people thought I was, and it's weird how people, especially in California, how people in LA, people were respecting me because of my car. But anyway, I got the job as the warm up. And through it, there's so much more that happened in LA. I had mostly like 4 years, both New York and LA. But I worked a lot in Europe as well during that time, which made me a better comedian. I was lucky to work in England and Ireland, and then started working in Paris and, all these incredible places. I've worked in Australia and, Bangladesh and Dhaka, I've started doing all these amazing things. And then I moved back to New York, 1990. And I got a job warming up the Dana Carvey show, which was that brilliant show that they had. And it didn't last long because it was a little too intelligent for a mainstream audience. It's very silly and very smart. And so that didn't work out. So I wasn't warming up anymore. And all of a sudden, one of the producers over at the Carvey show worked at the Letterman show, and Dave said, hey, do you know anyone who could do the warm-up? We need a new warm-up. And that's how I got the Letterman job, because I was recommended by, it's like that. The one thing about the comedy business or entertainment is who you know.
Yeah.
And you have to be good.
And
you have to be good, but,
Right, you have to be good, but you're jumping forward a little bit, Eddie. I just want to bring everybody up to speed. First off, you're that organization of cabaret people voting you the male comic 3 times, even if it doesn't mean that you're maybe the best in a world that includes Carlin and other amazing people. It is still respect. And I think that's, all of us need validation in our life and are looking for some sort of idea, benchmark of how we're doing. And I think that association of cabaret entertainers showing the respect they have for what you were bringing to the industry, to entertainment in New York, and especially in comedy, it's such a great honor, and congratulations for that. I want to get a little more detail before we jump into TV warm-up, which I want to explain to the audience as well. But how did you manage that world tour? Did you hook up with an agent, or was it a USO thing? What were you doing?
Again, I went to school with Dennis Leary, and we were roommates at times in school, especially, and after college we were roommates. And him and his wife went over to London to go do a television show, and his wife was pregnant, and she gave birth prematurely to their son. Luckily, he's 6'4" now, but he was this tiny little bean when I met him. And I went over there to see him, and I figured, might as well go see if I can get a spot at the Comedy Store and see if I can, pull that off and do a guest set and see what happens. And I went on stage, and I luckily had one of the best sets you can ever dream of having, for an audition. And it was it was very intense. The comics in England at the time hated the American comics and weirdly enough, for good reason, because there was a lot of pandering that goes on in America, where they don't put up with that in England. They don't, if you're funny, you're funny. Stop, using pandering to get people to love you. It's not really that sexy to be a panderer. In fact, it's, for me, it's not alluring at all,
Right. Right.
to
No,
do
I
that.
agree.
So a lot of the comics would come over and treat the British comics like they were lesser people, so there wasn't and this was, 1989 when I went there. So I went over and I luckily had a phenomenal audition, and then they asked me if I would stay for the week and do sets. And then I started becoming friends with the comedians there. And then they took me to Ireland. They took me to all these wonderful places.
So
And,
really, Eddie, another huge opportunity just by being good in who you met. You weren't part of any tour. You weren't being sent around as an agent. You just met people that took you along for the ride. That's amazing.
Yeah, and you have to learn how to audition. You have to learn how to, how to put a set together if you're only doing 5 or 10 minutes, you want to, it's like a cut from your album. You're not going to play your whole album for the audience. And, it was kind of funny because when I went in there, everyone was very cold to me. And the booker was like, all right, you get 10 minutes and I'll give you the light at 9. And when you're, and you only get 10 minutes, not like all those other fucking Americans that come over and don't listen to me. And I was like, whoa. And then I went up to the MC, the compere, and his name was Bob Mills. And I said, well, I was about to go on, and I gave him my intro. I did this, I did that. And he looked at me like, I was a piece of shit, and he walked away. I'm like, wow. And then there was another comedian who was in the back of the room with his arms folded when I went by. And the MC didn't bring me up with any intro that I had given him. And I was like, that's weird, especially because I followed a music act. And when you're following music, you sort of need the MC to do a little time.
A little transition, right.
He didn't do any transition. He brought me up during the other guy's applause. So he really tried to make it hard for me to follow, but luckily I did well. And then later, I hung out every night in the green room, and finally the MC started talking to me about comedy, and then he saw a book I was reading and he liked it, and we started becoming friendlier. And I said, what was that bullshit the first night when you were so mean to me? He said, well, you came up to me, started bragging about your career. And I went, bragging about my career? What are you talking about? He said, are you telling me all these shows you did? I go, that's my intro. And he went, intro? He said, why would you have an intro? Why would you tell the crowd how good you are? Just show them how good you are. We don't care about that. He said, you're a comedian. You know a lot of comedians who have intros and all these credits, and they suck. They just happen to, be in the right place at the right time. They might have a connection, but doesn't mean that you're a good comic because you have these credits, There's a lot of comedians without credits.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective that hearing it makes sense. I mean, ran a club. I was an MC. I always made sure that everybody had a good intro and a build up because it helped the audience transition. But for the British talent to feel like, screw that, you earn it, bud.
Yeah. Every time you go out, you earn it. And that's how the audience knows if you're funny or not. But if you start telling people, this next person is, has done this show, it doesn't mean that they're good. It just means that it could mean that they're good, but it could mean other things as well. And you know what? In America, we're used to it, the intros. So the audience is expected, but in England, they didn't. But now more and more in Europe, they're doing, a lot of people are sort of, westernizing it by doing some intros and talking about the different television shows that they did. But when I was in England, there weren't a lot of British comedy shows that were stand-up based. And, I was lucky enough to be able to do a bunch of those, and that got me a lot of exposure over there, and it made me a better comic.
Yeah, because the opportunities are amazing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but in America, we're up there, on stage, and we're just, telling the audience, love me, love me, love me, and asking for their approval. And it really is not, again, it's not as alluring as just, going up there with your own truth and not really, focusing on the audience's love, but more focusing on your truth. And that's the biggest lesson I've gotten in all the years of comedy, is just to go up and tell your truth and not care so much that the audience adores you. It's nice that they do, but it's the attitude is, it's like, I'm not here to please you kind of attitude. And when I was booking comics, which is a bit of a jump, I would look at the comics who were confident and didn't care about my approval. And that was much more alluring, again, to me as a booker, as a fellow comic, to see someone like Dave Chappelle just go out there and tell his truth. And if someone doesn't like it, they don't like his truth, he never shied away from it. He didn't know better. He went out on stage as a young kid, told his truth. That's why all the great comics, it's one of the things, there's a thread that every great comic has. And one of them, the main one is the truth as the foundation, and the next one is vulnerability, to be able to allow yourself to be vulnerable and not be afraid to do that. And that really opens you up as a human being to be vulnerable. And then the third thing is to, not try to please the audience, to actually go out there and do what makes you laugh, what you love, and hopefully the audience will, like it as well.
Well, Eddie, you're sharing so many important points to this industry. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is that I'm sharing with the audience that stand-up comedy is so much more than just getting up on a stage and doing a joke, which in itself is hard. But to be a true comic where you're invested in what you're doing, you're writing every day, and you're, as you mentioned, you're bringing your truth and you're showing your vulnerability. Those are things that make the difference between, I don't want to be rude, but the hacks versus the people that you and I as club bookers would respect, which are the people that are really invested in the art form. I just think that these are really important things, and thank you so much for sharing them. Eddie, that great tour that you did starting in England, which, by the way, I interviewed Kelly Monteith, and he was saying the same thing, that the attitude towards American comedy worked against him in the beginning, but then he was able to turn it, and he became quite the celebrity in England and getting his own show and stuff. But by earning their respect with his truth and his talents. And it's the fact that you took that on to Ireland and around the world is part of what makes you such a well-rounded entertainer. Let's bring it back to where we were going next, the next step. I wanted to explain to the listening audience, because a lot of people don't know that sitcoms or anything taped live in television, whether it's New York or LA, has a host or MC/warm-up person. And what a lot of people don't know in television is that when you're doing a half-hour show, it might take 6-8 hours to get it all on tape and get all the different takes and camera angles in. Well, you need somebody, the glue, to hold all those sections together, and that's the host/warm-up of each particular show. So when you were doing the show, Saving the Bell, I think it was.
Saved by the Bell, yeah.
Saved by the Bell. I was a big fan. But that opportunity, again, Eddie, you got an opportunity to learn another aspect of the industry, learn some additional skills. You've already had your MC skills from the Paper Moon Comedy Club, and here you are in front of a TV audience, keeping them focused, keeping them entertained in between takes, and that led to meeting other people in the industry. I alluded in your intro, you ended up being the warm-up comic for The Late Show with David Letterman. You did it for 17 years?
Yeah.
That you were about to share that story. So they saw you working some other rooms. Did you have to audition for David, or they just threw you up there and you kicked it?
Well, Louis C.K. and a guy named Bill Sheff both worked at Letterman. Louis was a producer on the Dana Carvey show, and so he knew that I was the warm-up. Well, I mean, we knew each other from stand-up days, the Boston scene and all that. And Bill I also knew him from the New York scene. And they both told Dave, look, Dave went to them because, comics know comics. So he went to them and they said, you should use Eddie Brill because he's a pretty good warm-up comedian. We used him on Dana Carvey show. and it worked out really well. So I met Dave, and as sort of like got a 6-week trial period, and it worked out really well, where it went to 17 years. And it was just
yeah, 6 weeks to 17 years. Yeah, I think you passed the audition.
yeah, amazing. It was like a dream come true, to be on that stage where the Beatles were. And I was on, it's one of the greatest theaters I've ever done stand up in. And every night for, 17 years. Well, I went 14 years without missing one show.
Wow.
At the beginning, I had a little more leeway to take time off to go do gigs like the Montreal Comedy Festival and stuff. But Dave wanted me not to take time off, and they treated me really well financially for me to promise that I would just stay with Dave whenever we had a taping, no matter what. And so, then the next 14 years after the beginning, I was, I never took a night off, and Dave loved loyalty, and he, it worked out really well. It was really fun. And then, I got to be on, like I said, on stage every night where the Beatles were, where the Supremes sang, and then I got to meet, I got to meet Sophia Loren, my dream girl, I got to meet Burt Bacharach and sit at the piano with him. I got to be really close with Don Rickles, which was great because my father was a huge fan of Rickles, and the Rickles on the air said something really nice about me, saying that he loved me and all this stuff. And it made my father cry because he was like, wow, my hero comedian loves my son. You know what I mean? That kind of,
that's a great moment, Eddie.
Art moment,
That's such a special moment. When you could do something, it's funny, we're always our parents' kids. For me, I opened this comedy club. I was having some success. My dad had an amazing sense of humor, and he was a huge fan of Pat Paulson. Well, I was able to meet and bring Pat Paulson in, and then Pat and I hit it off. I spent time at his ranch. We were really close. And my dad was just like thrilled because he was able to hang out and have dinner with his hero, Pat Paulson, from the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. It's great when we can do that for our fathers. But Don Rickles and all these people, Burt Bacharach, all these people you got a chance to interact with, I imagine, night after night. There's always amazing people on the Letterman show. You're backstage with them.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I mean, it was ridiculous.
I mean, you couldn't name drop that many names, Eddie. I mean,
no.
But just to have that experience. Now, were you just, I don't want to be rude, were you part of the staff, or did you and Dave become friendly?
Yeah, I mean, I was part of the staff, definitely on the staff. I didn't really hang out too much with a lot of the staff. I mostly hung out with the crew and the band. And, those were more the people I hung out with. But, Dave and I got close, and, me, him, and Bill Sheff were always at the desk every night. And, we were both huge hockey fans. So we would go out to dinners. And I remember one night, me, Bill, Don Rickles, and Dave went out to dinner, and we laughed for 2.5 hours.
Oh, man.
Things like that go on. And it was like ridiculous. And then we'd leave the dinner looking at each other like, what just happened? Oh my God, and, it was pretty amazing. And then, like Dave would take us to hockey games, and, it was crazy. And, every once in a while I looked down at Dave because I was lucky to be at his desk in every commercial break. And one night I'll never forget, looking down at this, I go, that's fucking David Letterman, and I had been there for like 10 years or so, but it was just so surreal to be part of, like, some of the things that happened. Like, I got to hang out and meet Paul McCartney, and it was amazing. It just was amazing. And I while it was happening, was in the middle of it, so I didn't realize what went on. But when it was over and I was heading home, I shook like a leaf because what had just happened was so ridiculously amazing. That it was like, I shook. The cab driver was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm okay."
Yeah, I just hung out with McCartney. I think I'm doing all right. Well, Eddie, what's interesting is what we alluded to earlier is that when you go from being a fan to a peer, in other words, when you're out with, these people and David and you Rickles and David, I mean, they weren't looking at you as a fan or part of the staff. You were their peer. You guys were three comics just bullshitting and making each other laugh. I mean, those are magical moments that were probably as important to Don Rickles and David Letterman as it was to you, because we all need that interconnection and the sharing of the moments. And just God willing, you were blessed with so many. I'm blessed life.
Yeah, it's been amazing. You know, it really has. But it's not, you know, the key is I put the work in, and I never phoned it in. You know, I never believed in being anything but amazing. And that was the great thing about working at Letterman, because we not only had the greatest, you know, one of the greatest broadcasters in the history of the world, David Letterman, we also had the number one cameraman, Dave Dorset, was Walter Cronkite's cameraman. We had the best lighting people. We had the writers who were on the show, these Harvard guys, you know, and there was you work with the best lighting people, you work with the best band. You know, it was just amazing. So you have to bring your game up to that level, and you play at that level, and it's really, really rewarding and fun and exciting. And, you know, it was so satisfying to be able to, you know, do this show. And then when the day was over, forget about it, because you got another show tomorrow that you've got to
you got to do it all over again. It is a job, which is interesting because it's amazing miracle experience each and every day, but each and every day it is a job that you're going to, and you have responsibilities, and that combination of wow and work is just so fun. I can't wait to see the book you're going to write, Eddie. Tell me.
I'm waiting to get a publisher. I've written over 320 stories, and I put a lot of them on Facebook just to get feedback, and, you know, I've gotten a lot of that. And, you know, some, you know, pretty amazing people love what I'm doing. It's just to try to get a publisher, because, see, I'm not like Mr. Famous guy, you know, like I'm not someone that's on TV every night now and millions of people are watching me and know who I am, and I could go just sell a book. I'm a guy that comedians know because I was booking a television show.
Well, this podcast will put you over the edge. Don't worry, Eddie.
Well, hoping for it, you know, hoping it would work out this way. But, you know, it's a very different, you know, it's a very interesting place to be, because, you know, I'm not like Louis Black or George Carlin or, you know, any of these kind of people where you walk down the street and everyone notices. But the people who do remember me or notice me, I think of that as even more rewarding, because, you know, I'm that comic that they saw. But they, you know, even if they don't remember my name, it's just nice to get that sort of ego stroke.
Yeah,
in
but
there.
You've had so much success, Eddie, and the experiences can't be traded. I had a chance to interview Tom Dreesen, and this guy had so many amazing stories working with Frank Sinatra all those years. But quite honestly, Tom Dreesen's not as famous as, let's say, Leno or Letterman or Carvey even, you know. So that doesn't mean that his life or your life wasn't as impactful in the industry. It's just it's just that golden ticket of fame, which is nice, but not necessary for the value of your success, Eddie. I did want to ask one question. We're running out of time, but can you explain how you took being the warm-up act and your experience booking the Paper Moon Comedy Club? I know through my research that you also helped book some of the stand-up for this show. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, well, you know, like I said, I was at the desk in every commercial break, you know, whether it would be just bullshitting about the day or some sporting event or talking about an idea for the next segment or whatever, or, you know, just laughing and being silly or picking the song that maybe we can get Paul and the band to play. I mean, it was really fun. We talked about the Beatles all the time. That was one of the things we were able to do, which was great. But at the same time, you know, we talked about comedians we liked, and Dave would bring up, you know, the Comedy Store days, and he was before me, and I was able to tell him things about some of the comics of that day, and I told him about the club that I booked, and I knew all these comedians, and we would, you know, just share ideas of what we liked comedy-wise. And, and all of a sudden, Zoe Friedman, Bud Friedman, and Silver Friedman's daughter, who's an amazing, amazing human being, very funny, very knowledgeable, and has helped a lot of people in the industry. She was working as the booker over at the Letterman show, booking the comedians, and she got a job at Comedy Central that was, 10 times more involved over at Comedy Central. She was kind of running the show there, and so she left Letterman. They were looking for a new booker, and because Dave and I talked about comedy all the time, he asked me if I would take over. And at first I was tentative because I knew that all of a sudden now my life would be, I was running a comedy club and I had hundreds and hundreds of comedians, but this was going to be thousands of comedians. And since I worked as a comic all over the world, there was going to be about 4,000 or 5,000 people asking me to do these 12 spots or 15 spots that the show had comedy on during the year. And Dave talked me into it, and I started booking the comics on the show, and I got to book the Smothers Brothers, and I got to book George Carlin, and I got to book Roseanne Barr. I got to put on amazing comedians, on the show, and then I got to take some young people who were kind of starting out, like Hannibal Buress and Mike Birbiglia, and I could again give you 1,000 million names.
No, but Eddie, I mean, as a booker myself, it would be a dream I felt important enough in helping people's careers, booking my little chain of comedy clubs, getting the opportunity, and we should tell the audience, you did this for about 11 years, right? That you had a chance to bring in the comedic talent for the Letterman show. That had to not only be exciting, but just damn fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really nice because it was quite a job. It was really a very intense job. Alone, that would have been an intense job. And I had like 5 other jobs as a comedian and, a writer and all these other kind of things. But, to be able to see a young comedian. Also, I brought a lot of international comedians on the show, like Joe Wong from China and Tommy Tiernan from Ireland, and, all these different comics that were amazing that America didn't know because, they're from other countries or whatever. But I knew that which comics would, transfer well over to the States, and gave a lot of international comics some breaks too on American television. And I knew how important it was when I got international exposure on TV in Australia and in England. And so it was a very rewarding and also very hard because there were some of my best friends and some of my mentors I wanted to book and I wasn't allowed to because they weren't, the producers and the show, they say, no, we don't want this comedian or whatever, it wasn't like I was.
It puts you in a tough spot. Well,
yeah, there are people who don't like me, who don't know me and there are people who, this is kind of a weird but honest situation, is where some of these comics, thought that because, they would make a mistake or they weren't right for the show, and they couldn't accept that the fact that they weren't right for the show. So I was the bad guy.
Right. No, the booker's always the asshole. I mean, I played that role for 20 years. I made some people really happy and was their best friend. And there were lots of people that I, decided didn't have it or wouldn't fit my stage per se. And they blame me as opposed to realizing that it was what they were bringing to the club or to the stage that made the difference.
And I could talk for myself. I understood it. I knew that I had a lot of people who were trying to be my friend because I was booking a club, and I never looked down on it. I understood it. If I was in that position, as I've been before, you want the booker to see you. You want that to happen. So everyone, I had my number, my home phone or my cell, my email address. There was nobody who couldn't get in touch with me, so that, I made myself very available. And after an audition, like I remember auditioning for some of the bookers, and after it was over, they'd all leave. And then you never know if you did well, you didn't go to sleep, what you did, it was good or bad or right. I vowed that at the end of every show, I would stick around to the end and talk to any comic who wanted to.
Yeah,
ask
I
me.
did the same thing. It makes such a difference in people's lives when you can give them honest feedback. Hey, I wanted to be respectful of your time, Eddie. It's been so great having you on the show. You need to go soon, but before, can you give everybody just a quick explanation of the Great American Comedy Festival? Because what you did for Nebraska and in the memory of Johnny Carson is so impressive. Give us your elevator speech on that event that you helped create.
There was I got an email, and then a phone call about this. They were interested in having me teach a workshop to comics as they were putting on this Johnny Carson Amateur Comedy Festival, and I was so interested because I love Johnny. I met with them right away, and the more we talked, I said, "Look, this is going to be a shit show. You're gonna expect They wanted 60 amateur comics to go on stage, or over 2 days, like 30 comics a day, going on stage, and it just wasn't going to work out. I knew as a booker, these people were very nice people, but they had the best intentions, but it was just going to be horrible. And I said, if Johnny Carson, he didn't book amateurs. We can do that, but you should book people on the cusp, people who would if they had the chance to be on the Johnny Carson show. That this kind of comics. And so I said, look, give me the chance. Let me become the creative director. Here's my plan for the thing. And they said, okay, you have it. So I ran with it, and then we had some of the greatest comics in the world. Not only, I brought in like Roy Wood Jr. when he was a young kid, and I brought in, I could just name, every year we had like 20 to 25 great comics as part of the festival. And at the same time, I was bringing in major headliners like Robert Klein and Paula Poundstone, and eventually Martin Short. And, it just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the 10th anniversary was one of the most proudest moments of my life. 10 years booking this incredible festival in the middle of cornfields in Nebraska, where Johnny grew up. And all of the townspeople were so nice and so lovely to me and so thankful. We became the number one tourist attraction in Nebraska. We were getting respect all over the world for this comedy festival. And then all of a sudden, after year 10, when we're rocking and rolling, the people who were the local townspeople pulled the rug out from under me and said, we're going to do it ourselves. And
hey, thank you very much. Get the frick out of here.
Right. I trusted them so much. I gave them everybody's phone numbers and email addresses, and I gave them the agent's phone number so that it would, we could work together. And they took all of that stuff and hoarded it. And then they dropped, they really were disrespectful. It was one of the most disrespectful things that ever happened in my life. I'm very proud of the festival, but, they ended up, there was a lot of, it was very weird. It was very Harper Valley PTA kind of stuff and it's a shame because,
it's one of the reasons I hate working with any sort of, I do a lot of fundraisers and events, and I'm always so challenged to work with anything done by committee, because it doesn't take much to swing that committee down the wrong path. And, let's let that go. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great American Comedy Festival may be out there, may not, but for the first 10 years.
It still goes on, and a lot of the comedians call me and say, hey, look, do you mind if I do the festival? I know what they did to you. And I said, no, do it. It's stage time, and that's the number one thing in comedy, to get stage time. And do it, and don't worry about all the politics or the small-minded people or it's not. I can go to sleep at night knowing that I did the right thing,
And you did, and you made something out of nothing and made it very special, and it's too bad it wasn't appreciated. I just didn't want to end the interview on a down note. So let's remind everybody you've been a lifelong success, a lifelong of great opportunities that you were wise enough to take advantage of and had the talent to make work for you. And I think that's something we can't let go by, Eddie, is that you had the talent and you put in the work to make all these opportunities pay off for you. And from that end, thank you and congratulations on all your success, because whether it was starting a improv group in your college or working the Paper Moon Comedy Club or ending up being the talent coordinator for comedy at the Late Show with David Letterman, took those opportunities and earned the value that you brought to the entertainment industry. And for all that, congratulations.
Well, I appreciate it very much. And it's really fun to talk. Why don't you run comedy clubs anymore? You got sick of it, or?
I did it for 21 years. Comedy was changing. The talent was changing. I started before the big wave of comedy back in 1980, and I got to ride that wave, and it was just time. The club I started is still operating. I've moved on, and I'm doing more philanthropic work and helping with fundraisers and charities. But I still have my toes in comedy.
Very good. Very important. It's one thing you never lose. You never, it's just like once you get that laugh, once you're involved, you can't leave. It's always in there. You look at Seinfeld's a billionaire from doing all this great TV show and doing all this great comedy all over. And he still went back out and did stand up. Even Leno's, when we're recording this, Leno was on fire just the last week and 2 weeks ago. And then he was on stage 2 weeks later, because you just got to do it. Look at Rickles and,
Well, our good friend Bob Saget was on tour when he had his accident and passed away. I mean, all these people worked for me and at one time, and they were not famous, and now they're rich and famous. And guess what? They're still doing what you mentioned, is bringing their truth and their vulnerability to the stage in stand-up comedy. And that's why it's such a special art form.
It really is. And I appreciate it. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm at Eddie Comic at Instagram. I do have, other ways to get in touch with me and all the other ones, but Instagram seems to be like the one nowadays that people are getting in touch. So,
well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a gift. He's sharing Eddie Comic at Instagram. So make sure you reach out and tell him thanks for all he's done for the industry. Eddie, this is a stand-up comedy podcast. I'm going to end this with a little bit of your stand-up comedy. But right now, I just want to say you've had an amazing message and obviously some incredible stories. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Take care.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Here's some great stand-up comedy by the one and only Eddie Brill.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back our good friend Eddie Brill. Eddie, come on out. Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. When I was growing up, my grandma used to always say, "The truth will set you free." Then she went to prison for perjury. I'm lying. If you haven't been lied to lately, try online dating. Nobody tells the truth in online dating. Sometimes they ask questions like, "What's the worst thing you ever did?" And you can't tell the truth there. Sometimes they lie about their age. Sometimes they lie about their weight. Sometimes they don't have a picture of themselves. So sometimes it's like a horse. You're so insecure you got to show your horse? Years ago, I tried it, and I went online, and the girl in the picture, I set up a date with her. She was 28 in the picture. When she showed up, she was 52. 52. I thought it was the girl's mother showing up to tell me she couldn't make it. But the good news, she let me ride her horse. But we're all insecure to a degree. We grow up thinking we're not good enough. So we go on a date, we're not going to bring ourselves to the date. We don't want that to show up. So we create a character we think the other person wants. And they do the same thing. They create a character they think we want. You're not on a date. You're in a play. And you have lines like, "So how many brothers do you have?" And you don't even care if she has a family. You're just wondering what she looks like without that dress. And girls pack on so much makeup, they show up to the date looking like a kabuki dancer. Like, he's not going to see my real face till I know he can provide for me. We're lied to our whole lives. We are. We're lied to about everything. Food, politics, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, Celine Dion, you know. When I was a kid in school, I took religion class, and they told me that sex was the devil's work. Oddly enough, it was taught to me by people that never had sex before. That's like getting hunting lessons from Dick Cheney. Not a good source. Not the source you want. But I don't believe there's a devil. Because I believe God created everything. So why would he create a devil? He's like, well, I made this beautiful planet with mountains and trees and ducks and Elvis Costello. But there's not enough drama in my life. Let me create some son of a bitch who's going to go against everything I stand for. And just to really make him mean, I'm going to force him to wear a red jumpsuit with horns, a tail, and a fork. Yeah, come on. You know what's funny about that? The devil has a costume. And here's the weird part. Many people wear this costume to Halloween, yet no one dresses like God. And I figured it out. This is what you do. You show up to someone's house in your street clothes in your bag, and you're like, trick or treat, and they go, who are you? And you go, I'm God. You go, well, where's your costume? Are you kidding me? I'm made in his image. Now give me some candy. That's how it is. But there could be a devil. We don't know. I don't know. If you say you know, you're lying, because no one knows what happened back then. But there was a devil. He would never create sex. He made deviled eggs. That's cool. And he has that hot sauce with his picture on the bottle. You know, he has good product. You know, he's the devil. He has good stuff. But he would never create sex. He's the devil. He would never let us have that pleasure. God created sex, and this is how I know. What do I yell when we're having sex? Oh, God, because we're thanking the manufacturer for the wonderful gift that he's given us. I also have a problem with the story of the first 7 days on earth. If you remember the story, the first day there was darkness, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. But here's where it gets weird. On the fourth day, he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. So what the hell was he using for light on the first day? What, did he create a flashlight and run out of batteries on day 4? Ever ready my ass. And man wasn't created till the 6th day. So how do we know what happened the first 5 days? Maybe that's why God created man, so he had someone to tell the story to. Adam, wake up. You're not going to believe the week I had. First it was darkness, then I made a flashlight, then I ran out of batteries. You don't know what a bitch it is to find D-cell batteries. Then I took molten lava and turned it around. Are you listening to me? If you don't pay attention to me, I'm going to create a woman, and she's not going to listen to you.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, that was Eddie Brill live on the Letterman show doing some stand-up comedy. Man, it was such an honor to get a chance to meet and chat with Mr. Brill. Eddie Brill has had an amazing career from the early days of working at the college to ending up doing TV show warm-ups and the Letterman show, you know, winning those awards from the entertainment industry in New York City. Just an exciting career, and he took the time to share it with us. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Thanks again for listening. Be sure to tell your family and friends. Let's blow this thing up and get it out there. We'll be back next week with another great show. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.